Some of the reasons senior level people do not get hired. There's always that question, irrespective of the times we're in. We get through to a point in our process. We obviously caught their attention. We had raised our visibility and got to the interview. And then after seemingly giving a great performance at the interview, we find that in fact we didn't get it. What are some of the reasons, Sandra, that executives end up in that category of not getting it? What typically goes wrong?
Well, first of all, you know, like I said before, there's going to be scenarios where you may never find out.
Mhm.
And from the candidate's perspective, it's very important to not obsess about things you're never going to learn about. But from my interviews that I've had with my boards and why did you hire this person and what made you choose this person versus that person, um, it all boils down to the fact that at the executive level, they're less likely to know the criteria of what they need. But the one thing they are clear about is that they know what needs to happen. So they may not know which, you have 4 people with proven track records. So that's sort of just apples and oranges to them. What they do know is what needs to happen. And the reality is that as human beings, our brains are having 30 thoughts per second. So we don't always know what the reasons the reasons that we think certain things. These are subliminal thoughts. We don't know what they are, but we form a conscious narrative with it. And that conscious narrative is formed by a lot of the things that Maxine trains about,
Mhm.
right? But one of the scenarios in particular where I was filling a CFO position and I screened lots of people and I came up with somebody that I felt was perfect for the organization. And they interviewed about 3 others. And the COO said to me, you know, something about him I just don't trust.
Hmm.
And I said, can you put your finger on it? And she said, no, it's just something, I don't know what it is. Most of the time, we don't know what it was. Well, I've been trained to sort of understand what those things are. And I said, do you think maybe it's the fact that he's wearing a toupee? And her eyes got really big and she said, maybe that's it. I said, do this. Why don't you have everybody else meet him and see if you get the same feedback? And she didn't. Everybody else thought he was perfect for the company. And she said, you know what? I bet you that's what it was. He ended up staying with that company until he retired. So when we talk a little bit more about these subliminal thoughts that are coming into our mind about what people are doing, we may not know what those 30 thoughts are that lead up to that narrative, but if we focus on managing more of that, we'll have more in our control.
Mm-hmm. Wow, great story too. I'm glad it ended the way it did for all. Maxine, part of what Sandra just touched on sounds to me to get into the area of fit within an organization. So if you're sitting in that chair, how do you, or can you even direct fit? How do you, as a candidate, help an organization, in other words, see that you are potentially the right fit for them? Is that something you control?
Well, I'd like to reflect on what Sandra brought up, and that is, she's right. There are things you can control, and there are things that you cannot control.
Mhm.
And in this new environment, the issue that I brought up earlier about nonverbal behaviors and tonal behaviors and verbal behaviors has somewhat shifted. And what I mean by that is we are now not doing a face-to-face interview, shaking somebody's hand, sizing them up non-verbally, and non-verbals constitute the highest level of interaction that we have. The first thing we're looking at, the first thing we're sensing, the feelings we're getting, some of the things that Sandra just mentioned about, I don't know, something, there was a feeling there I had. So the nonverbal is very big. Now it has shifted into a two-dimensional space, which shifts the nonverbal power down slightly. So what's important here is when you think about the nonverbal, tonal, and verbal behaviors, is what do I tend to do? What are my reflexes that I'm really good at, and what are the things that get in the way? Now, for example, if you are a person who speaks more softly, you're more reflective, you engage with people by sitting back in your chair, you may find that that's really difficult for the person on the other end of the screen to engage with. So suddenly you're in the situation where you have to pump up your engagement, and you need to know what kind of a style you present. It's important to know and get feedback on the style you're presenting to the interviewer. If
Hmm.
you are one of those people, as an example, who sits back, is much more comfortable in the chair, you may not be showing that quality that speaks to confidence, credibility, competence that they're looking for in the organization. And they may just decide on somebody else who comes across in another interview and adds another component to those issues, and that is energy. So people respond to energy. And it's much more difficult these days because of the situation on Zoom and everything else, all the platforms, to show that energy. So show that competence. It's something that little something that comes through. By upping your energy, you will have something else which attaches to tone. So tonal aspects are very important in terms of showing energy and engagement. If you speak in a monotone basis, that again is more reflective and may not connect to the person on the other end. It means having vocal variety. So if somebody asks you a question and you say, I'm really interested in that, that's one monotone way of saying it. Is the person listening to that might think, nah, I didn't sound that interested. But if the person said, I'm really interested in that, where my voice has gone up. Now, how do you do that? Well, as I'm speaking to you right now, you can't see the fact that I'm using gestures the whole time. We don't often have that ability right now, but gestures bring energy to our bodies and to our tonal aspects. The third is around language choice, and that is understanding how to put all these elements together so that they match the total message. Now, if you're depending upon the words alone to carry your entire message to that other person, you're accessing only about 10% of your ability to communicate with others. Tonal aspects are about 30%, but the biggest one, upwards of 60 to 70% of that interaction is what you're doing non-verbally. So you might be in a situation where if you're not showing some of these things, somebody subliminally, as Sandra mentioned, might look at that and say, person doesn't seem engaged. Person doesn't seem really interested in this position. So you must put all three of those together, and you must know yourself. You must know, what is it that I look like and what do I give off in an interview? What's my natural style? And am I energetic anyway and I'm showing that? Or do I tend to sit back and seek a comfort level that may not translate to this environment?
Wow, so much to take into account and pack and then unpack when you're at the interview. Thank you for giving us that view, Maxine. Harriet, I want to turn to you. First, I want to ask you if there's anything you'd like to add to what Sandra and Maxine just shared, but then I want to lean into what I'll call the pre-interview research part of that process. But first, what would you like to add, if anything, to what our guest just said?
Well, I think they both tie together. What I think they're both alluding to is that element, and you mentioned it, Tony, and we've had many conversations about fit. But I would like to say there's different types of fit. You have to look at it from various aspects. There's the position fit, obviously. Are you the right candidate for that position? And that gets into your history of accomplishments and experience and education and so forth. But what about motivational fit and organizational fit? Is there enough about that organization where your values align, where you feel that you could feel a sense of doing that work. And that's going to come through in your communication. And then finally, if it's applicable, there's location fit. What about the rest of your life, your family, the things you enjoy that don't happen within that organization but beyond? Your quality of life, is that a fit? And so all of that are elements that you have to think about. Now, in terms of due diligence, it is doing your research in the areas I just mentioned, and being prepared perhaps to talk about those and connect those. And we have a process, as you know, where we look at individual value themes and helping people to understand themselves so that authenticity can come through. Because the halo effect is alive and well, both positively and negatively. So whether it's a toupee or whether it's the college you went to, interviewers are going to have their bias. And so you need to be prepared in a positive and productive way to align yourself with all of those elements. And that comes from doing upfront research.